Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be back and to have so many of you here already this morning. I'm so sorry that we've started a couple of minutes late. As you might expect, we had a few tech issues as we haven't been here for a little while. So it's great to have so many of you here to join us again this morning. And I'm just going to run through and introduce everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Ruth Mullen. I'm the head of public sector employment, which governs all things education. I'm joined to could be my left or my right, depending which way you're looking at us this morning. I've got Suzanne Mannering, who is going to be joining Catherine Hare this morning in delivering a session around preventing harassment in the workplace, as it's a new piece of legislation that's coming in and that you need to know about. So as ever, very dynamic and getting information to you hot off the press. We've also got the lovely Gemma Duxbury this morning, who's here, and she does all of our things governance, procurement and information. And we've also got Laura McHugh from the employment team. We're out in force this morning because when there's a new bit of legislation, we're all dead keen to see what's happening. We're also joined by the lovely Sharose from our commercial litigation team, who is our big hitter, and anything that we need litigation wise, Sharose is there to support us. And not to forget the lovely Keller Bowers as well, who works in our insurance team, but is our absolute guru on all things like safeguarding and all the really important stuff that comes along with schools. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. The Q&A session is going to kick in after our presentation on the new piece of legislation. So hopefully you can all join us for all of it. Do feel free to pop any questions through to us, and we can be having a look at those while the presentation's going on. I'm sure you'll have plenty once the session gets going and you hear more about everything. But let's just get into the session. So I'm going to introduce Catherine Hare and Suzanne Mannering, and they're going to bring a session for you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so we're going to talk about preventing sexual harassment in the workplace for schools. So why are we talking about preventing sexual harassment on a rainy Tuesday morning? Well, the reason is as Ruth said, there's going to be a new piece of legislation coming into force on the 26th of October 2024. Now, you're probably already aware that 2024 has been a really busy year for employment law changes. These have all been coming into force on a piecemeal basis, so it's been really, really tricky to keep track of everything. We've had changes to the right to request flexible working, the new carers leave, we've had the extension of protection for redundancy for those who are on family leave. So there's been lots and lots for you to keep track of. And this is another piece of legislation for you to be aware of. Now, obviously, with the change of government, we were wondering, well, what's going to happen with the piece of legislation that we thought were going to come in later in the year. As far as we're aware, this is going to come into force on the 26th of October 2024, and I can't see any reason why not. Some things have fallen by the wayside. So the right to request a predictable working pattern was due to come in force in September. That hasn't come into force, but we're pretty confident that this is going to come into force on the 26th of October. So what do you need to be aware of? So this act is going to amend the Equality Act to place a proactive duty on all employers to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. So it's a proactive duty to prevent sexual harassment. The new duty is anticipatory, so it's going to require employers to anticipate how their staff may be sexually harassed to keep the position under review. So like I said, it's a new duty, and it's going to ask employers to take reasonable steps to prevent the sexual harassment of their employees in the course of their employment. Now, this act had an absolutely torrid time going through Parliament. Initially, the new duty was going to be that all employers had to take all reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. And you would also have to take these all reasonable steps to prevent third-party harassment in your workplace. Now, it went to the House of Lords, and there was a real battle in the House of Lords because they said, we can't pass this act as it is at present. It's too onerous on organisations. So what they did was they took out the word all. So instead of having to take all reasonable steps, an organisation now just has to take reasonable steps. It's still quite a high bar, but not as high as it would have been. And also they said, third-party harassment, that's too much for organisations to have to deal with. We're taking that out as well. So that was removed. And that was originally in the Equality Act when that first came into force, and it was repealed from the Equality Act. It wasn't working. So at the moment, so this is how it looks. You've got to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment of employees in the course of employment. What I will say is the third-party harassment part is still going to play an important part in how you prevent sexual harassment in the workplace via different means. And we're going to come on to that, a bit of a spoiler, but just be aware of that. And importantly, it provides employment tribunals the power to uplift sexual harassment compensation by up to 25% in cases where employers found to have breached the new duty to prevent sexual harassment. So quite a significant sum, really. An individual can't bring a freestanding claim for breach of this new preventative duty. And the
I'm
mutations.
sorry, your screen cut out for a couple of minutes. So you might just go back over that last little bit.
That last bit, of course, yes. Thank you. So an individual can't bring a freestanding claim just for this breach of this new preventative duty. And it's notable that the new duty does only apply to sexual harassment, just something to be aware of. So what are the potential cost implications of this? This is the first time Ruth's seen these amended slides. Picture of Victoria Wood there, which will all become apparent. And I am showing my age because I do appreciate that everyone might not know who Victoria Wood is, but it will all become clear. But the potential cost implications could be quite significant. So we've got the Equality and Human Rights Commission that we're going to talk about shortly, but they've got this guidance, sexual harassment and harassment at work. And they've amended this guidance to kind of reflect this new preventative duty. We've not seen the final version of the guidance as yet. It's coming out tomorrow, but we've got a pretty good idea of what it's going to say. And within this, it just gives an example of how this uplift would work with an employment tribunal. So it says a worker's successful in a claim for sexual harassment against their employer. The employment tribunal orders the employer to pay £30,000 compensation to the worker for loss of earnings for injury to feelings. The tribunal must then consider if the employer has breached their preventative duty, and if so, whether to apply the compensatory uplift. So that's kind of the thought process of the tribunal. So the employment tribunal decides that the employer has breached the preventative duty, but the extent of the breach is limited. So the employer has anti-harassment policies, so big tick, and procedures, tick, which are communicated to staff, tick, through regular training. So tick, tick, tick. So they're doing lots of things. However, the employer has not reviewed the effectiveness of the policies or training in several years. So it hasn't kept this under review. And obviously, if there has been a claim for sexual harassment, they're probably not working. So in this case, the employment tribunal orders the employer to pay a 10% compensation uplift. So the total compensation payable in this theoretical example would be £33,000. So that's kind of how it would work. So it would look at what provisions do you have in place as an employer? Do you have training? Do you have policies? Are these kept up to date? And then they would apply a percentage and apportion it to that. Now, with regards to sexual harassment cases, I did just have a look just to kind of see some recent cases. And there was this case of Mr. S. Nuns against a hotel in Windermere and Mr. A. Wilson. And this was a case which involved Mr. Nuns, who was a head chef at a hotel and restaurant, and he brought a claim of sexual harassment against the actual hotel, and also Mr. Wilson, who was the hotel manager. So we've got Mr. Nuns, the head chef, Mr. Wilson, the hotel manager. And what I would point out here is that whilst a lot of the literature around sexual harassment is, women being sexually harassed in the workplace, it can be men who are sexually harassed too, and this was the situation in this case. So the acts complained of here, which were found to be unlawful harassment of a sexual nature, included the manager touching the employee's knee on several occasions whilst driving the employee home from work. And then there was some inner thigh touching. The manager putting his hand on the employee's bottom on 2 occasions. And then the manager singing the Victoria Wood sketch, the ballad of Barry and Frida, and in brackets, let's do it, close brackets, in front of the employee. And during this, the manager attempted eye contact while singing and made gestures. So I think if any of you are aware of this Let's Do It sketch from Victoria Wood, you can imagine, I suppose, kind of what was happening in the workplace here. And what was interesting was the remedy judgment was handed down in April, and the injury to feelings was £34,000 plus interest. So that's a really significant sum. And the total award was over £79,000. So of course, if this was handed down in April, the judgment was last year. So it's before this duty came into place, where the tribunals could then potentially uplift it by up to 25%. You can't prove that you've got this preventative duty in place. So yeah, just be aware that there are some significant damages that are attached to sexual harassment cases. So I'm going to hand over to Suzanne now to talk about what sexual harassment is.
Hi, thanks, Kat. So the starting point when looking at sexual harassment is, what is sexual harassment? Now, sexual harassment, as we know, it's unlawful under the Equality Act 2010, and it occurs when an individual engages in unwanted behaviour of a sexual nature that has the purpose or effect of violating someone's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating or offensive working environment for the individual concerned. Sexual harassment will also include treating someone less favourably because they've submitted or refused to submit to the unwanted conduct of a sexual nature in the past. Conduct can still be considered sexual harassment, even if the alleged harasser didn't intend for it to be. It's how the individual perceives it. And sexual harassment can occur even if the conduct is not directly targeted at the other person. For example, say the display of pornographic images in a workplace, or making of sexual comments about women generally, can create a degrading, intimidating or hostile working environment for co-workers who see or overhear them, even if they were not the intended target. When considering the effect of behaviour on someone, it's important to view things from their point of view. So you need to remember that it might be difficult, especially from perhaps more junior colleagues, to speak up and challenge unwanted behaviour, but it doesn't mean that it's not having that effect on them. Sexual harassment is a serious workplace issue, which can have lasting effects on those who experience it. And sexual harassment often has the effect of making the recipient feel ashamed, humiliated, undermined, frightened. And so it can also have an impact then on their mental health or their careers. So clearly the potential implications are quite definite. If we move on to some of the examples of what would be considered sexual harassment, it can include written or verbal comments of a sexual nature, including remarks about an employee's appearance, questions about their sex life, or offensive jokes. It can be outright propositions or advances, or the making of promises in return for sexual favours. It can include emails, social media. It can be your WhatsApp messages, where the contents are of a potential sexual nature. As we said before, it can include the displaying of pornographic or explicit images, like we used to see in old school garages, I suppose, used to be the main example we give of that. It would include unwanted physical contact and touching, and it can go as far as to include criminal behaviour. So it can include all-out sexual assault, stalking, indecent exposure, and offensive communications. Looking more particularly at schools, what I would say is schools aren't alone in having to deal with sexual harassment. I mean, you only have to look at the press recently. We've gone from the Me Too movement generally. We've recently had the BBC taking action in regards to Jermaine Jenis. And even last week, we've had all of the headlines surrounding Harrods So it is certainly a widespread issue. But if we look at a survey undertaken by Unison in conjunction with UK Feminista in March this year, the figures that we see include the idea that 15% of respondents have witnessed sexual harassment in the school in the last 5 years. That figure increases to 25% in secondary schools. A third of respondents recorded having heard sexist language being used in schools in the last 5 years, and 7% said they witnessed this behaviour daily. 4 in 10 were unsure whether their school had a sexual harassment policy, with 4% saying their school didn't, and 2 in 5 said they would not know what to do if they witnessed something they considered as sexist. Now, I appreciate that given the survey was done by Unison and UK Feminista, who themselves campaign for gender equality, we could question the reliability of some of those stats, question, you know, what were the questions actually asked of the respondents to get those responses. However, if we look at those figures together with the survey undertaken by Ofsted back in 2021 on peer sexual abuse and harassment in schools, those figures look less surprising when we look back and see that in that case, 92% of girls and 74% of boys said sexist name calling happens a lot, sometimes to them, or they see it happening to their peers, which, you know, all of which goes towards saying that there is a genuine issue in schools regarding potential sexual harassment scenarios. And I go a step further because the Unison survey also gave some actual examples of what they saw happening. That included an incident where a female learning support assistant at a school in Herefordshire, easy for me to say, described how a pupil tried to kiss her and push her head towards his crotch. There were many examples of pupils touching or slapping a member of staff's bottom. There was examples of a previous head teacher having said inappropriate things to a member of staff, including, "I'll watch you do that, it's better than work," or "stand here and look pretty, I'll do the talking," all of which are capable, obviously, of amounting to instances of sexual harassment. But I would say one of the benefits that schools have at the moment over most employers is that since the Ofsted survey in particular, you guys have already been putting the work in to improve that picture. And you are already actively working on combating the issue with pupils. And with that in mind, this new duty concerning your staff is going to be building on a lot of what you have in place, and just is less work overall for you than it would be for some other commercial employers. I can hand back to Kat.
Thanks, Suzanne. So yeah, thinking about what these reasonable steps will look like. The Equality and Human Rights Commission have put together, like I said, this guidance in draft form at the moment, but we were pretty confident we know what he's going to say. And it kind of helps us to think about what reasonable steps organisations can take to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. Like Suzanne said, you hope you're already on a journey with regards to sexual harassment in the workplace. But these are some things just for you to think about, putting in place going forward, if possible. So just who the Equality and Human Rights Commission are, because you may or may not have come across them before. I'll just read out their mission statement. So they're an independent statutory body with responsibility to encourage equality and diversity, eliminate unlawful discrimination, and protect and promote the human rights for everyone in Britain. So that's kind of their mission statement. You may have seen them in the press because it was the Equality and Human Rights Commission who investigated McDonald's when there was concerns about sexual harassment in the workplace there, and they entered into a binding agreement with McDonald's to prevent sexual harassment going forward and to put measures in place. So that's probably where you may have seen them in the press if you hadn't come across them before. So the guidance confirms that it's going to be an objective test that'll be applied on the circumstances of each case. And basically it says that employers need to consider the risks of sexual harassment occurring. So by considering the risks, we would think that they would be looking at producing risk assessments. Now, we understand the Equality and Human Rights Commission are going to produce a template risk assessment. So it's a case of kind of putting together some kind of pro forma, which we are looking at doing as well, that we can provide to organisations as kind of what are the risks in each kind of situation. Have we thought about it? Have we documented it? Organisations will also have to consider what steps can be taken to reduce those risks and prevent sexual harassment of workers and implement those reasonable steps. So it's going to be a proactive risk assessment kind of scenario. So some general examples about what reasonable steps may look like. So be committed to preventing sexual harassment in the workplace. Have clear policies in place, including strong reporting procedures. So policies, having that evidence there, making sure these policies are living, breathing documents. Encourage a culture where staff are comfortable speaking up, both if they've experienced sexual harassment or if they witness harassment. So knowing who they have to report this to, who would they go to if they experienced sexual harassment, witnessed it? Do they know what the reporting lines are? Keep harassment policies under review and have measures in place to ensure they remain effective. So that's going back to the example that the Equality and Human Rights Commission did in there, and looking at the compensation, where there was a compensatory uplift because the policies weren't seen to be effective. They weren't kept under review. Ensure the harassment policies include a clear statement of the required workplace behaviour, which includes behaviour at work-related social events and in online communication. So thinking about, you know, Christmas parties, we are going to be coming up to Christmas party season. Think about risk assessing that. You know, if you're going to be providing alcohol, are you going to limit the amount of alcohol? Things like that. So again, just kind of risk assessing those kind of situations before you go out there. I think an email saying, you know, please it's the staff do, may not go far, thinking about that proactive duty. And raise awareness with regular staff training so they're aware of what harassment is. I think if the training can be in person, that's always preferable to show that people could ask questions if they wanted to, that people were engaged, it wasn't stale, it wasn't simply a tick box exercise. That's always preferable. I know it's not always practicable, but something to think about. Train management so they know what to do if harassment's reported to them, which is really important. Line manager training. And take allegations of harassment seriously and ensure appropriate actions taken. So can you show that if someone reported harassment to you, there was a zero tolerance approach and appropriate action was taken? I think what's important as well within this guidance is that it's clear that what is reasonable will vary from employer to employer and will depend on a number of factors. So in the education sector, I think larger schools and colleges may have more to do than those that are smaller. So just be aware of that. That's going to be a consideration with regards to reasonableness, the size of your organisation and the resources that you have. And like I said, third-party harassment. So this wasn't included within the legislation. It was taken out of the actual act. But within the technical guidance for the Equality and Human Rights Commission, as it is at present, it does refer to third-party harassment. It says that the new preventative duty requires employers to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment of workers by third parties. We think this approach is taken because of the way the Act is drafted. It says an employer A must take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment of employees in the course of their employment. So, of course, the third-party harassment element is there. So be aware that there is going to be this third-party harassment element, which Suzanne's going to talk about, which is going to it's kind of some ways that you can look at preventing harassment by third parties. But like I said, it's not in the legislation. It is slightly confusing, but the way the Equality and Human Rights Commission guidance is drafted at present, it is included within there. And why are we looking at this Equality and Human Rights Commission guidance? Well, tribunals will have a recourse to that as well. They will look at that when making their determination. But actually, the Equality and Human Rights Commission have separate enforcement action. So they can investigate an employer. They can issue an employer with an unlawful notice. They can ask you to enter into a binding agreement with an employer to prevent future unlawful acts. And they can also go to court to ask for an injunction to restrain an employer from committing an unlawful act. So they really do have teeth. They are going to take action, and with McDonald's, they are quite keen in doing that. And the Labour government are really keen on this too. So just be aware that consequences of a breach can be quite significant from an enforcement point of view by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And of course, as we've discussed, if it goes to tribunal and is successful, then an employment tribunal will look at increasing any compensation by up to 25%. I'll pass over to Suzanne to talk about what this means for school.
Thanks, Kat. As we've just said then, a failure by schools to prevent sexual harassment of staff by pupils, by other staff, by parents, by contractors, and potentially any other third parties may represent a breach of this new duty. If we look at what that potentially means, and again, just looking at those figures that Kat mentioned earlier in Nuns versus SPH Wimbledon and Mr. Wilson, if we look at an award of £33,000 and there's a 25% uplift of that figure, you're looking at that award going up to £41,250. And so, you know, what we know is the financial impact of cases surrounding this issue are potentially significant, and they're significant at a time when we all know the budgets of schools and colleges are just under increasing pressure all the time. So it is something it's worth getting right before you ever hit that point. Similarly, you wouldn't want to be subject to an investigation by EHRC. And I'd also say that we already know from Ofsted that they look at sexual harassment and how it's being managed as an issue within schools. So, for instance, on day one of them coming in, they'll ask for any records and analysis of sexual harassment and or sexual violence in the school. Further, schools are already expected as well to assume sexual harassment is happening in and around the school, even where they've had no reports of it. And so Ofsted and the Department of Education do expect schools to be acting on to prevent sexual harassment, online sexual abuse and sexual violence through a whole school approach. And that, while that does concentrate on peer-on-peer abuse, this will obviously also cover any issues arising from staff. And I think we can say with certainty that if you had an EHRC investigation that found there had been sexual harassment in the workplace, that would then have an impact on future Ofsted reports and could perhaps result in an early visit. So while we might not know for certain the exact approach Ofsted are going to take to the particular new duty, we already know they take sexual harassment issues seriously. And the last thing we want is this to be added into an issue with staff becoming a problem with Ofsted ratings. In particular as well, if there is an EHRC investigation, you're also looking at things that are going to result in negative publicity for a school, and therefore can have a major impact on the school's reputation, which has a potential to then have a knock-on effect on student numbers, which again impacts on funding. So it is important to bear this in mind, I would say. And so looking at perhaps some of the more reasonable steps and how they work for schools. I'd start by saying I get a lot of these reasonable steps might at first instance make you go, that's a lot of extra work. But again, you guys are already doing a lot of this already. So you're already way ahead of most commercial employers when you're looking at this, because you've already been having to deal with issues surrounding peer-on-peer abuse and the education piece needed for all of your pupils and students in respect of that. So looking then at what schools, we'd suggest schools have a look at doing to take account of the new duty then. The best place to start is going to be finding out how much of an actual issue sexual harassment is for staff in your school or college. And that would involve an anonymous survey for staff, really asking questions about their experiences surrounding sexual harassment, ask if they've witnessed it or been affected by it, and if so, what happened, where it happened, and for details of the type of perpetrator, i.e. was it students, was it parents, was it staff? Because obviously that allows you to direct your attention to where the biggest problem is within your organisation. And you'd always also ask if they're aware of the procedures that the school has in place. If they reported it, and if they didn't, what was stopping them from reporting it? That would also give you some interesting information and allow you to assess what your particular organisation needs. In that respect, I get that that might seem like that's a rock you don't necessarily want to look under. But if it's done anonymously and it's asked in, the questions are asked in the right way, it doesn't have to be a bloodletting exercise. So it isn't something that you necessarily need to be really concerned about. It's more about getting the information you need to make sure you can effectively meet your new duty. The ECHR guidance does suggest there's an alternative way. This might not be better in any way, it might fill you with more fear, is to have those discussions with the unions as well, and see what they are aware of, what they think the main risks are for your workplace. Now, obviously, in any new policy, there'll be a degree of consultation with the unions, but getting their input can also go towards meeting your obligations under the new duty of understanding what's taking place in your workplace and therefore what procedures and steps you should have in place. Once you have that information, wherever it comes from, you need to consider if there are particular members of staff who are being targeted. Are there specific areas of the school where it's a greater issue? Are there common characteristics that are coming up from that research piece, the audit? And if so, as we've said, you focus your attention and some of your training on dealing with those issues. You will also need to, as Kat said, introduce a system so that staff can quickly and easily report and record incidents. You'll need to make sure that's known to staff, and that staff aren't afraid to rely on it. They don't fear any kind of victim blaming as a result. Now, as I said, I'm pretty sure you guys already have those systems in place, and you've already done a piece of work on that because we've already had that low level concerns from a safeguarding perspective, and it's, you know, similar procedures really. So even if you haven't got it exactly in place for sexual harassment, you're already going to have the systems in place, and it'll be a case of amending those systems for most of you to just widen them to include sexual harassment, I'd expect. Make sure that your line managers and the senior leadership team know how to deal with a complaint appropriately, whether it's because they've witnessed an event themselves or one's being reported to them. So this would probably include some additional training for the managers and the senior leadership team in particular to ensure they're comfortable and confident with meeting that obligation. Again, you're probably already doing this to a degree for dealing with peer-on-peer abuse. So it's likely to be adding to what's already being performed in terms of that training, as opposed to something entirely new. But it is still needed to make sure that that degree of training is being provided so you can show you're meeting this new duty regarding your staff. You also need to have a system in place to support staff who have suffered from sexual harassment. And again, that goes towards making sure your reporting systems and what happens afterwards works. You then decide how you're going to educate your pupils about sexual harassment and who's going to deliver that training. Obviously, again, you're already doing a lot of this because of Ofsted guidance following the peer-on-peer abuse issues. But, you know, you're considering what is the right approach for the different age groups. So what might be appropriate for a senior school mightn't be the same as what's appropriate for a primary school. And again, it's more likely that what you will be doing is adding on to that existing education program you've got in place, as opposed to starting from scratch. You'll similarly need to ensure that you communicate to parents and guardians to make it clear that you won't tolerate any sexual abuse of your staff by them or their children, and tell them how you deal with incidents. In the same way, you want to ensure that you're also covering any other third parties. So that would include your trustees or your governors, contractors, etc. In the case of your trustees and governors, that will probably include having it as a minute in one of your board meetings each year to discuss that obligation, to make sure they know what is expected of them and also what you're expecting of your staff, so they can be assured that we're meeting the new duty. Obviously, for contractors, that will likely include making sure they've got proper procedures themselves in place when you're inviting them into your workplace, so it will form part of that risk assessment you're doing anyway. We do appreciate that there are budget constraints for schools, and so when we're talking about when you're conducting this kind of training, that's why it's helpful to know that you guys are actually building on a lot of what you already have in place, as opposed to it being an entirely new cost coming in that you weren't expecting. Obviously, it does include actually training your staff. So I would say you want at least one session a year that you ensure covers this issue of sexual harassment in the workplace for all staff. And I'd also suggest that maybe at your perhaps regularly at staff meetings at the end of a meeting, you remind them, perhaps as you do with low-level concerns, of what the procedures are in place for reporting and being supported. So you can show that there isn't just a one and done approach, but you're making sure that the process that you're rolling out remains appropriate. When you're dealing with issues promptly and consistently under the correct procedures, you also then need to evaluate, if an incident happens, whether that means that the systems are appropriate and fit for purpose. And I'll pass back to Kat.
Oh, sorry. So, as I said, 2024 has been a year of employment law changes. It was already quite a frantic year, I would say, and then we had a change of government, just to add that into the mix. So the Labour Party have made, been really clear that they're going to protect workers' rights, and they've set out already what they intend to do moving forward with regard to this. They produced a green paper initially. They then produced a document called Labour's Plan to Make Work Pay, which was a really comprehensive document explaining the changes they plan to make if they were going to be elected into government. They then produced their manifesto, which had some more employment law elements to it. And then, of course, there was the King's Speech. So I've had quite a lot of things to read recently. I've certainly not been bored. And we're expecting an employment rights bill imminently. The Labour Party said that they will produce an employment rights bill within 100 days of them coming into office. So the 4th of July was when they were elected, so it's imminent. It's going to be placed before Parliament at that time. It's not just going to become law, but we're going to expect some wholesale employment law changes. And within that, they have referenced sexual harassment as well. They want to kind of strengthen the position with regard to sexual harassment in the workplace. So they say they're going to strengthen protection for whistleblowers, including by updating protections for women who report sexual harassment at work. And this would mean sexual harassment complaints would become not just discrimination, but also whistleblowing claims, meaning that there was potential interim relief. Excel says that when this does become law, if an individual feels like a business or an organisation isn't complying with the duty, then there is potentially protection anyway. But Labour are going to strengthen it. We'll have to see what that looks like. They also then, we've gone full circle with the third parties. They're saying that actually they're going to require employers to create and maintain workplace and working conditions free from harassment, including by third parties. So it was taken out of the legislation. Labour are saying that it looks like they're going to try and put this back in. And this quote, sexual harassment at work. 1 in 2 of all women have been sexually harassed at work. This must change. Labour will strengthen the legal duty for employers to take all reasonable steps to stop sexual harassment before it starts. Like I I said previously, though, it's not just women who have been exposed to sexual harassment at work, it can be men as well. But, you know, clearly this is on Labour's radar. So when the Employment Rights Bill comes out, we will, of course, let you know if there are any enhancements to the duty, to this proactive duty. So takeaways, key takeaways from this. I know there's been a lot to take on board, but I think it's just really important just to take a step back and just conduct a workplace audit. So see what you've got already in place, see what you need to look at amending in anticipation of the 26th of October. Review your current policies. It's all about evidence, and tribunals will want to see that you're kind of looking at your policies, thinking about do they do the job that we need them to do. You may not have just a sexual harassment policy. It may be in your equality, diversity, inclusion policy, dignity at work, bullying and harassment. So just kind of see where this is and make sure it's up to you've viewed it, you've thought about it, and you've noted down your comments and thought about, actually, you know, we need to improve this, and complete a risk assessment if you like. So you can document, well, actually, we thought about this, there is this risk here, this is what we've done. And of course, training, like Suzanne said, you know, there aren't enough hours in the day, so some more training is really difficult to fit in. But just think about, you know, the training that you do already. If it covers sexual harassment, does it meet these requirements of this new legislation? Do you do it in person if you can?
We seem to have lost you. You seem to have frozen out.
Of course, you know, we can help with any training needs as well. Oh no, gosh, sorry, not again. Sorry.
You cut out just on the last bit, but I think.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just thinking about training, like I said, just think about your current training. Does it meet the requirements? If you don't have sexual harassment training in place, look at implementing this. If you can do it in person, that would be great. And of course, we can help with any training needs you may have as well. So I can't see if we've had any questions, but please do let me know if anyone does have any questions, and we can answer them now or follow up as needed.
Thanks, Kat. I think we're going to share the slides as well. So if anybody wants to have those slides, they will be shared around after the event today. So that will be helpful. But thank you. I think that was a really interesting session. And we have had a couple of questions, but they're not necessarily related to this morning's topic. But I'm sure while you're all chewing that over, if you do have any questions, do just pop them on the Q&A session, and we'll take the questions that we've got at the moment. So the first one is a completely unconnected question. We have a self-employed support worker, an ex-teacher, due to start working with a child in one of our primary schools 2 days a week, but she's struggling to get her DBS check done. She's asked if we could complete the check via school, but she's not actually our employee. She'll be invoicing us. Is this something we should do? Gemma, I don't know whether DBS check is something that you would look at. I think from an employment point of view, we would be questioning that because they're not employed by you. I think the check probably has to be done by them. But I don't know whether, Gemma, you've got any more on that.
I'm not sure, to be honest. I would probably agree with you on that. It's the employee's responsibility if they're not employed, I would have thought. I will double check that though and see what I can
we'll maybe come back to you on that question in a moment. But my thought process, I'm a trustee at the school as well, that I think you can't actually do it for somebody who isn't employed for you. So it may be a case that you have to wait unless they've got a previous DBS with you. Sometimes people have those and they continue on for a period of time, but I certainly think it is something that you would need to look at. Gemma's going to take a quick look, so we'll perhaps
I've had a quick look, and it seems a bit conflicting, to be honest, what it says. But it says because they'll be working on the school premises and it's classed as regulated activity, the school can initiate the DBS if they're not directly employed. So like, for example, with like contractors and things like that, they normally get their employer to do it, don't they? But I would say the concern I've got is that the school does have safeguarding duty. So if you know, I think it's a grey area, but personally, if she's not going to get it, then I think you might have to step in from a safeguarding perspective. That would be my view of it.
Yeah,
Just
I think just making it clear that that responsibility does rest with the
Absolutely.
person as a self-employed person,
Yes.
and just check that with the person that you do your DBS checks through as well, because that might depend on what happens there. But if you do need more help on that, do let us know. Get in touch with us offline, and we'll try and assist where we can with that. We've had a few others come through. The one for the ladies on the sexual harassment. Do we have to have a separate policy for sexual harassment, or is it okay to make sure it's covered as part of our anti-bullying and harassment policies? Kat, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I mean, I think as long as it's included in a policy, you don't need to have a separate policy really, but it's just making sure that what you've got in your policy is fit for this new preventative, proactive duty. So yeah, I think it's important, like I said, to kind of do an audit, have a look through, does it do what you need it to do? There doesn't have to be a separate policy. It doesn't really matter kind of what the name is, I suppose, as long as people know where to find the policy, understand what's included in it. So I think an information piece is always quite useful, maybe a communication to the people who need to be communicated to explain where the policy is, what's included in it. I think that would be absolutely fine. But I think these risk assessments are going to be something that would accompany kind of these policies, to think about, you know, certain situations where sexual harassment may occur in the workplace and what measures you put in place to prevent that, and keeping those as separate documents would be really useful as well.
Thanks, Kat. And just while we've been listening to you, Kat, one of our colleagues has helpfully put a comment on to say that they don't think that the person will be able to get an enhanced DBS unless they go through an organisation. So it's definitely worth checking with the people that you get your DBS checks via. And I know that the person who asked the question, thank you, has said you would have done it due to a safeguarding point of view. And I think when all else is in jeopardy, safeguarding has to come first. So I think you do that, but I just think you make it clear to the person self-employed that this is the reason that you're doing it, not because you're acting as their employer as such. But again, if there's anything further on that, do let us know. And there is one more question, which is an employment question. But I do know that Gemma had been dealing with something around AI and wanted to speak on that. So just to break up the employment law input, I am going to ask Gemma to talk to you about that next.
Hi, everybody. So I just wanted to flag really AI. It's a really hot topic at the moment. Obviously, lots of people are panicking about it. I know as lawyers, I think we were all panicking about it, thinking, oh, blimey, we're going to be out of jobs at this rate because of the advances in AI. And effectively, the message that I want to sort of give is that AI is coming in one way or another, but we have to use it with extreme caution. There's lots of different types of AI that are out there, and there's lots of issues with that AI. So depending on the type of AI that you're using and the information, it can have a negative effect. So, for example, there's some of the different types of AI. There's narrow or weak AI, there's reactive machines, there's strong AI, limited memory, and natural language processing. That's just 4 of them. And a lot of it's about mimicking humans' basic actions, such as remembering things. So rather than thinking on its own, it's remembering, it's trawling that internet, it's getting bits of information. It's not thinking of itself. Reactive machines, this is a very limited capability. They have no memory and they are task specific. So again, it's similar to that narrow or weak AI comparison. They don't have the ability to learn things. They just respond on inputs that have already been put in. You then have the strong AI, which claims to create intelligent machines that are indistinguishable from the human mind. And the goal is that this is trying to sort of solve problems at a faster pace. And then we have something called limited memory, as I've said. So an example of that is self-driving cars. And what they do is they observe what other cars are doing on the road and they try and mimic it. Now, the issues, so some of those types of AI, you've got your Chat GPT, which I know we've all had a nosy at because I've had a nosy at it as well. And I think Laura, my colleague who's on here, had a heart attack once when we looked at it once when we were at that conference, Laura. But my message basically is, look, AI is there. It is coming. Be aware of it and embrace it, but to an extent, because there are huge risks relating to it. So there's data issues, so it can be held on unsecure systems. The data might be stored outside of the UK. It could be considered under data protection a change of purpose, depending on what you're using that information for. And also inaccurate personal data can be created. So you just have to bear all these things in mind. And I'm not saying don't use it. I'm not saying don't embrace it, but just be aware of the risks and be mindful that it's not necessarily always going to be right. And a lot of the problem with AI is if somebody inputs information that is incorrect, it will regurgitate that information, even though it's incorrect. There's no sort of official check for it. So my advice really is be aware of it, embrace it, but think of the different types of AI that you might permit as a body, and take that through your senior leaders, your trust boards, your governors, and ensure that your IT policies are up to date. We will be doing more on this because this is a massive area, as I've already said, but I just wanted to flag it and sort of say, don't panic. It is coming. We are going to have to accept it to a certain extent, but we're not going to be out of jobs. And effectively, there are still going to have to be those checks there. So it was just a little brief outline to cover what's going on in the AI world.
Thanks, Gemma. It's always useful to know. And I have to say that I think they're never going to take over from us because people like people. And hopefully we'll continue down that vein with the input of AI in the future. We've had another question through about the presentation this morning. And the question is, I'm going to ask Suzanne to take this one. Apart from the survey, is there another recommendation for proactive action? Just a bit apprehensive about the survey. People get nervous and assume something has happened, which, yeah, I think that was an issue we were discussing when we talked about this, but I'm going to ask Suzanne to talk you through a couple of other options as well. Thanks.
So one of the things is obviously about if you were doing like a survey is how you coach it, you know, explain why it's because of a change in the law. So I'd say in regards to them worrying about the reason for it, there is an explanation you can provide. But I think more than that, it's looking at where you, at the evidence you already have you had any reports of sexual harassment from your staff? What has the work you've already done on peer approach told you about the issues that you've potentially got within the school, and build on those? So you've already probably got a degree of information available to you. In terms of that, it's, as we said, it's reviewing your policies, it's considering add-ons to the education program you're already running to make sure this is adequately included. It's the training to staff to make sure it's specifically included in your training to staff, potentially the additional training to your senior leaders and your managers so they know how to deal with these issues. And it's also that information piece of telling parents, carers the expectations and making sure things like your trust boards know, you know, it's recorded there in the minutes of the board meeting. Again, that would show evidence about it being treated seriously, as would any correspondence to staff, any amendments made to those policies, training that has been brought in after that. So there are lots of things to do. It isn't just the survey. The idea with the survey is to highlight where your main issues are, but you might have a lot of that information already.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. And another one on employment this morning. So this is a question about summarising the Alabaster ruling. This is quite an old case, but it seems to have reared its head on our friendly Google, you know, embracing AI and all that. And it seems to be that people are thinking about how they implement it. And it's basically the rule of thumb is that you're talking about somebody who's on maternity leave and there was a pay rise due, and whether that's been factored into calculating the statutory maternity pay. So the 90% for 6 weeks, of course, would go up if somebody should have had a pay rise and hadn't because they were off on maternity leave. It's a European court ruling, which at the moment, those are still influencing us until Kat tells us something else. So, you know, at the moment, that's still alive and kicking. But it's just kind of being aware of it. And it is going to impact probably more on your lower paid members of staff as well. Because, of course, if they didn't hit the threshold for statutory maternity pay, because of the lack of that pay rise, and then they should have had it, you might have to go back and recalculate. And there are very specific rules around the calculation of that and when it kicks in terms of thresholds. So hopefully that just gives you a kind of overview of what needs to happen. If anybody does have any specific questions on that or needs us to help them look at the calculation, then do let us know offline and we can obviously try to help on that. Just a couple of other comments coming through. Thank you for the comment on AI. We're embracing it and have acknowledged the risk, and the links with that. I think that's really important. I think that's what everybody's having to look at the moment. So I think we do need to embrace it. We just need to learn how to work with it, and sustain all of ourselves as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for the input this morning. That's been really helpful. Somebody else has said they've missed the Q&A because they were called away until now. Sorry about that, but yes, there will be a recording available. I think May will be sending that out after this morning. I'm conscious that we started late, want to keep to time for you today. Sharose and Keller have both been here. We haven't had any particular questions for them this morning, but as ever, it's always valuable to have them here. We could see situations, of course, where the sexual harassment things goes wrong. We could end up with court claims and things depending on values and things. So Sharose could end up being involved in that. And Keller, as ever, is our guiding hand on some of the, you know, more pressing safeguarding type things and insurance things. So if anybody
I would
does
just very quickly jump in because I have done a little bit of research on the DBS while we've been talking. The DBS guidance on gov.uk, which is specific for employers, actually specifically says in terms of self-employed workers who are eligible for a standard or enhanced DBS check can ask the organisation that wishes to contract their services to apply for their check. So it seems, and it is confusing, Gemma's right, there's other references to contractors, which I think they're referring to things like builders and things coming into the building. They only need one if they're in 3 times in 30 days, and there's all sorts of weird sort of caveats. But in terms of a teacher, that would seem to be the answer.
Brilliant. Thanks, Keller. As I said, having Keller here is always helpful. She's been working away there in the background. If anybody does need anything else, do let us know. Just having a quick look, a few different thank yous and updates. So you're very welcome. We will be back on the 15th of October. So if you have any pressing questions, then get them all fired up and ready for us for the 15th of October. And we will see you all then. Thank you to all my colleagues for the input this morning. I think it's been a really good session. We will share the slides. And until next time, we will see you soon. Keep going. And we look forward to seeing you back in October. Bye for now.
Bye.